Welcome on All Saints Sunday 2016. We're happy you're here. There doesn't seem to be much humor these days leading up to our presidential election. The same lack of humor is often attributed to the lives of the saints. By some accounts, they could seem to be a rather gloomy bunch. But on the contrary, a couple of stories for you. In the 3rd century, when Christians were still being persecuted, St. Lawrence, who, while he was literally burning to death on a grill over hot coals, called out to his executioners, "This side is done, you can turn me over." It's true. You may remember St. Augustine of Hippo, as a budding Christian emerging from a rather notorious life. And he prayed, "Lord, give me chastity, but not yet." Or St. Teresa of Avila, one of my favorites. She was on this journey, to a convent. She had founded a series of convents in Spain, and she kept getting thrown off her horse. And each time she'd get back on her horse, she'd climb in the saddle, and she'd pray for God to help her. So after the 3rd time that she got thrown off the horse, she looked up to heaven and she said, "God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so many enemies." So today, as we reflect on all those saints, and the ones who are in our hearts today, those upon whose shoulders we stand. And in this particularly contentious election year, I'm really glad we're pausing for a moment. And even if we cannot laugh just now with each other because of political angst, we can pause to consider the saints. Because throughout the 2,000-year history of Christianity, no matter the political climate, faithful men and women shared their faith with others, lived their faith in the world, suffered for their faith in their day, and some even lost their lives for their faith. So first, a story about a political time and election. My mother was living with us on election day in 2000, November 7th. We had ascertained from our household discussions that each of us was going to be voting for a different candidate that year. And neither of us particularly liked the other one's candidate. So we usually went to our voting place together, and my mother had even suggested that because our votes were going to cancel each other out, that we probably didn't need to even bother to vote. But I said, "Oh no, it's our civic duty, and if you taught me anything, it's that I need to do this." And so no, we're both Americans, strongly supportive of our democracy, and by midnight, we would probably know who the next president was going to be. So why didn't we, in the spirit of unity, go voting late in the afternoon, stop by the local pub and have a glass of wine, toast to each other and to whomever it is that was going to be our next president, and pledge to support whoever that person was, which is what we did. 2000. There was also in that year a friend of mine who had been recruited by our State Department to come to the United States for a week to observe how elections were supposed to be done. So this person, this guy, came, observed how elections were supposed to be done, and then left a week later. And right before he left, he called me and said, "This doesn't seem a lot different in the United States than it is in Haiti." Obviously, he returned to Port-au-Prince with the election still undecided. And as you may remember, that year, we did not know the outcome of the election for president until December the 12th. Now, this week I was walking by a Roman Catholic church in a neighborhood in D.C., and there was this banner draped across the front of the church, and it said, "All sinners," and then underneath, "Welcome." And I smiled, because at first I thought, oh, well, of course we're all sinners, and that's the whole idea. That's why we come to church. I often say, if there weren't sin, I wouldn't have a job. So Yeah, we're all sinners. So, but then I realized, oh no, this was like the day after, literally November 1st, All Saints' Day, and that there was this play on words and concepts. And so this was this invitation to All Sinners' Day, which I thought, that might be a more accurate description of this day that we're celebrating. If nothing else, it would keep us from being sappy and sort of sentimental about the saints in our lives, and really sappy about what it is to be a Christian and to live the Christian life. And in fact, Luke's gospel today does just that for us. Keeps us from being able to be sentimental about what it is to be a Christian in the world. Given Jesus' words in Luke's gospel, we are not left many ways out of the simple picture that Luke paints for his disciples. God plays favorites. And if there are favorites with God, which I'm still not sure about, but according to Luke, the favorites are the poor, the hungry, the mournful, the persecuted. Just think about that for a minute. About the possibility that God plays favorites, and God's favorites are the poor. In the church in the 20th and 21st century here in the United States, we have often tried to rationalize this simple message from Luke. Luke is much too straightforward for us, and if the truth be told, in his version of the Sermon on the Mount, which is what we heard today, we all prefer Matthew. Do you remember the difference? Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That gives us some wiggle room and a little bit of a way out. We can psychologize or spiritualize about the poor and even identify with the poor if it's the poor in spirit. And so we say to ourselves things like, well, I'm not poor, but I identify with the poor. Or, I surely know what it is like to be poor in spirit, to have my spirit deflated, even to be depressed. So I too am poor in spirit, and therefore blessed. We might say, I am not poor, but I understand their circumstances, and I have compassion for them. I care about them. Or we might say, I'm not poor, but I work for the poor. Or I'm not poor, but I send money to the poor. Now, well, none of these attitudes is necessarily a bad thing, and I certainly have said all of these things. They do miss the very simple point that Luke is making. The poor are the ones who are blessed. We could rationalize in the same way and substitute the hungry with even bolder sort of statements like, I know what it is like to be hungry because I missed a meal yesterday. Or the mournful. I lost my father at age 90, so I know what it is like for you to have lost a son. Or the persecuted. I got rejected from the college that was my first choice because they saved too many spaces for the minorities. Get the point? Nod? Yeah? What Luke is saying to his disciples and to us, the followers of Jesus in our own day, is simple. It is what Luke has been saying since the words of the Magnificat fell from the lips of Mary in the first chapter of Luke. The Mighty One has done great things, brought down the powerful, lifted up the lowly, filled the hungry with good things, and sent the rich empty away. It is evident in the witness of those poor, uneducated shepherds in the fields during the birth narratives in chapter 2 in Luke. It is the same with Jesus' healings and the parables of the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son. What Luke's Jesus is inviting us to is not psychological or spiritual. It is earthy and real. If we want to know Jesus, we must hang out where Jesus goes. We must go to the poorest neighborhoods, the poorest countries. We must share what we have with the hungry, sit quietly and helplessly with those who are broken with grief, and stand with those who are scorned and hated, reviled and excluded. We must be with the poor, so it's not them and us, but it's all of us together, with the hungry, remembering those who starve on our own streets, the refugees with no food, those who are being bombed out of Aleppo, with those who are sad or mourning, broken often in their loss, crazy in their grief, those who have stopped making any sense at all, with those who are persecuted, singled out, bullied, ostracized, the unacceptables who have lost standing and status. And then, according to Luke, whatever happens next, we are called to forgive and forgive and forgive over and over again, to turn the other cheek, to keep giving away what we have, to treat others as we want to be treated ourselves with dignity and honor, and in the process to learn how to really love. It's simple. It's a simple message, and yet it's hard at the same time. I know it's hard for me befriending, actually making friends with those who make me uncomfortable or whose circumstances are so foreign to me that I would do almost anything to distance myself from them rather than approach them in an honest way. But it really is simple. We are called to a life of self-giving that showers God's presence and our attention on those who have little or nothing or who are in trouble, forcing us to rely on God's power working through us to just make it through. The good news is this, that this call that we hear in Luke today is so rigorous that we cannot do it on our own. And if we take it up, we will inevitably cry out to God for help, which may be, in fact, why the poor seem to be referred to the rich in Luke's gospel. At least the poor have nothing to lose in betting on God and God's grace. And there is a lot of good in that. And maybe no greater gift nor benefit to any life than to know the need for God and to act on it. That is what the saints have given us down through the ages, the courage to hear and live the gospel in our own time because they did in theirs. Oh, and you know, about that election, just vote. We really are all saints and sinners, and whatever the outcome and whatever your political differences are with your family or friends or neighbors or fellow parishioners, practice these words from Luke. Keep making friends with those whom you don't understand, and forgive. Gosh, if you can risk it, turn the other cheek. Continue to give away to others. Treat everyone as a beloved child of God. And let's together just keep learning to love. Amen.